Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. I'm your old pal Bigfoot. Today we've got 2 for Tuesday Dogman stories. There's the story of the Dogman by the old cabin. And there's this first story, which we like to call Dogman Walked Through the Living Room. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got a story to tell you that I myself didn't believe for years, even though it happened to me and I saw it with my own eyes. You'll understand why after I get started telling you about the time I saw Dogman walk through the living room. Okay, when I was a kid through teenager, my younger sister and I used to stay with our Uncle James and Aunt Esther each summer and Christmas for a few days or a week. I don't remember what my parents did during that time, but they would drop us off and we'd all take a break from each other. Our aunt and uncle allowed us to do more stuff, and they fed us more of the food we liked, so at the risk of sounding rude, we were kind of glad to see our parents go, and they seemed glad to get a vacation from us too. Uncle James and Aunt Esther lived in an old house, just a bit too small to be called a mansion, but it had the feel of the Addams Family house and had an air of mystery about it. It seemed magic to me, and I always expected to see a ghost there, but we never heard even the slightest rumor that it might actually be haunted. So, one night, after dinner, we were all still sitting at the table and joking around with each other, just enjoying the company and having fun. It was not a spooky moment at all. It was a happy and jovial one. I was the only person facing toward the living room. Everyone else was looking toward me and the kitchen behind me when I suddenly saw the single strangest thing I've ever gotten to see, even to this day. I saw what looked like a German shepherd man walk from the left of my vision to the right, out in the living room. Now, there wasn't exactly a doorway between these two rooms. It was more of a square arch. Like, imagine a doorway 3 or 4 doors wide, but with no doors in the frame. That was what was there. Past each edge of the wide open doorway was maybe another 6 or 7 feet of area, which I couldn't see from my angle. Where the giant bipedal dog walked from was space occupied by a tall floor lamp, and where it walked to was a piano and an easy chair. It didn't seem possible that it could have been over by the lamp with none of us noticing it, and it didn't seem as though there were enough room to accommodate a creature of its height and girth in the area I saw it walk into. I had been telling a funny story when it happened, so my sudden silence and strange expression was interpreted by the others as me using dramatic silence to build up to a punchline. Their eyes were all trained on me, waiting. Instead of finishing what I had started to say, though, I got up and ran to the wide open doorway, all the way on the left of it, and I cautiously peered around the corner to my right, around that edge, looking for the upright walking 6-foot-tall German shepherd man. I couldn't see it. I leaned further and further, and by now my sister started asking me what was going on. My aunt asked me if I had seen a mouse. I laughed. No, I told her, I definitely did not see a mouse. My uncle was at my side now, looking where I was looking. We both walked out into the living room and looked all around. But everything seemed normal. Do you mind letting me in on what I'm supposed to be searching for? Asked my Uncle James. My mind spun as I wondered how to put into words what had just happened. I sat back down at my seat at the table, and I told them I would explain if they promised not to laugh or make fun of me. I told them it wasn't a joke, it wasn't funny, so if they laughed, I was going to go to my room to be alone. My sister told them she could tell I wasn't kidding, so I felt safe enough to start explaining what was going on. To the best of my memory, what I told them was a more descriptive version of what I've already told you. I'll try to paraphrase what I can remember. From the area by the standing light past my view on the left, there walked a dog, but it walked on its hind legs like a man. It held its front paws like hands in front of it, and its tongue was hanging out of its mouth as it panted like any other dog. It had a benign expression on its face, almost a bored expression. It walked maybe 5 or 6 steps to the right, and it was once again out of my field of vision. It neither walked fast nor slow. It took somewhat short baby steps, and it seemed in no hurry to get where it was going. I heard nothing while it walked, and I heard nothing after it was out of my field of view. We all looked around intensely for about an hour after that, trying to find a way to prove that I wasn't hallucinating. My sister even got out her magnifying glass and searched for dog hair on the rug, or dog paw prints. She found neither, and even I began to wonder if I had been seeing things. My Aunt Esther had her friend who claimed to be a psychic visit us a few days later, and that lady went around the house making weird-smelling smoke come out of a bunch of what looked like dried grass bound together in her hand. She said there was a ghost in the house, or maybe more than one. According to her, this had been a crossroads in ancient times and even back into prehistory. We asked what that meant, and she said it was like building a house on a prehistoric version of Grand Central Station. She claimed that spirits were still crossing here all the time, but we would almost never notice such a thing. My Uncle James was skeptical, to say the least, and he asked how this kind of thing could be happening without any of us being aware of it. The psychic lady told him there were all kinds of energies in that room with us right then. There were both spirits and messages moving back and forth and up and down, and we would never know it because we didn't have the right equipment to comprehend and translate these messages and these people into coherence. Uncle James scoffed. "Oh, but you can translate them, right?" he mocked. "You can take these invisible messages and turn them into sense because you are so psychic. You have the right equipment. Do I have this all correct?" "Yes," she said, "that's exactly right." Then she pulled a transistor radio out of her pocket and turned it on. It gave the local sports scores. That sports report was in the room with us, but you didn't know, she scolded my uncle. You had no way of understanding that this information was in the room right here. But I have this handy-dandy secret message translating device, so I can hear the disembodied voices from beyond. Now she was mocking him, and we all laughed. Uncle James had to admit that she was making some valid points, so he gave her some emotional space to continue presenting her theories. One night, she told us, I was tuning around on this old radio, and I tuned in a broadcast of a baseball game featuring unfamiliar sounding announcers and players. I listened and listened, waiting for them to name the teams so I could figure out where the station was originating from. When they finally went to a station break, I discovered to my shock that I had been listening to a home game of the Montreal Expos. We all gasped in surprise. I won't tell you where this story took place, but it was very far from Montreal, Canada. The psychic lady continued. I tried again the following night, and again off and on for a couple of years, but I never heard another game from Canada on this little radio. We were beginning to get her point. I don't know how or why I was able to tune in a game from that far away, but on that one very special night, it all happened in reality. The spirit you saw, she said, pointing to me, was in all likelihood something you could have only tuned in on that one night. It would be doubtful that you would ever see that spirit, or any other spirit for that matter, crossing that path ever again. On the other hand, it could happen again at any time. And either way, just like me with the Montreal Expos game, you would never know why either way. That made sense to all of us, and so from then on we referred to the incident as the time I saw a prehistoric ghost dog, or the ghost of an ancient werewolf. We just accepted that it had to be a ghost, since it seemed to come from nowhere, then head back into that same nowhere. Fast forward 7 or 8 years later, my aunt and uncle had saved up enough money to redecorate the place. They had been living with the same carpeting and wallpaper that had been left by the original owners, and they finally were able to afford to put in their own carpeting and wallpaper that more suited their own tastes. When taking the paper down, they found that behind the piano, there was a hidden door in the wall. It led to another room that they had never known existed. In the room were spiders and bugs, and nothing else of any apparent significance. But it was right in the direction that the Dogman had been walking. Could that have been where he went? And if so, how had he gotten in there without any of us hearing him enter? Then came an even bigger shock, as the carpeting under the easy chair turned out to be covering a trap door in the floor that led down to a spiral staircase. It took some time to explore that, but eventually we learned it connected to a tunnel system that led to the seaside and the remains of an old, secret pier over 4 blocks away. Apparently, someone in the deep past had used this house to smuggle something. I don't know if they ever found out what or who, but they found that tunnel and the staircase leading to it. Again, it was right where the Dogman had been walking to, so I for one began to doubt that what I had seen was a ghost. I was convinced that somehow it was walking to one of those 2 hidden exits. My sister still feels to this day that it was a prehistoric ghost, and that the path it was walking on predated the house. But the ground floor in that house is over 20 feet over the surface of the earth under it. If that dog was a reflection of ancient times, it would have to have been walking on air. No, if it was a ghost, it was a ghost of something that had actually walked in that living room, either when I saw it or else many years before. Maybe it was a recording of an old event, but it could not have been an ancient or prehistoric event. It had to be a reflection of something that had once happened in that house, or else it was something that really did happen right in front of my eyes, just as I saw it. Maybe the Dogman was from an alternate reality, and maybe in its reality, the wallpaper did not cover that door, or the rug did not cover that tunnel system. But I know, in my heart of hearts, that the creature was headed to either one or the other on the night that Dogman walked through the living room. Don't go away, we've got another new Dogman story right after this.
OMG! Come on down to my hood episode this Tuesday night, the 25th, where the new AI character created by Will Brierly is gonna interview this guy who got married in a Taco Bell, this smiling lady from Canada, the hip-hop gamer. Hooray! One night only at the improved asylum, yo! 26th Street off 8, inside the back of the Soupy Market. You can't miss it.
Very time.
Dogman by the Old Cabin. Dear Scary Stories NYC. When I was younger, I used to hang with my cousin Ginny and her parents during the summertime. Her side of the family owned acres and acres of land, mostly undeveloped scrub land and forest, covered in impenetrable bushes and shrubs and vines. Ginny and I would walk for over an hour to an old dilapidated cabin on the property that nobody knew the origin of. My uncle said it had been there since before his daddy had bought the land, and they always assumed it must have belonged to the prior landowner. Supposedly, it had always been empty and nobody ever put much effort into coming up with a valid theory as to what its original purpose was. It was just a one-room cabin, so maybe it was a storage shed in the old days. On the other hand, it did have a sealed-up old fireplace and chimney, so that would indicate it might have been a tiny home for someone at some point. Either way, Jeannie and I would go there and play Ouija board or Sorry or Monopoly to while away the summer days. It was cooler in there than outside, after all. Sometimes, when it was time to go back to the house for dinner, we would stay later to watch this thing in the forest that we called the Shadow. No, it was not like the Shadow in the old pulp novels and movies and radio show or whatever. It was not shaped like a man. It was this sort of a blob shadow, a wide, tall thing, and it would move around off in the woods, always just a little too far away for us to tell exactly what we were looking at. That was why it was so hard to tear ourselves away when it was there. We always felt like in the next second, we'd get a clear enough view that we could finally see what it was. Well, on one evening, the sky grew dark, and it seemed like it was going to rain. It didn't, but the skies were dark as though it were going to. Cousin Ginny called out to me that the Shadow was back. Now, the path to the house was to the south, but the Shadow always appeared to the north. Maybe that was why we never had any real fear of it, only curiosity. It wasn't in our way. We wouldn't have to pass it on the way home, so we never really focused on the fact that an incredibly oversized something was out in the woods. Until one day, that is, when we finally did get to see a little too clearly exactly what had been cavorting outside that old cabin all that time. This time, we saw a family of deer, a male, a female, and a young one, and they were heading directly toward the Shadow. I wondered how we could see it if they didn't. Jenny shushed me. I thought we should yell to scare them off, but again, Jenny shushed me. Let them get closer, she insisted. Don't you want to see what the Shadow is? I had to admit I did, so I shut up and I watched. As the deer got closer, suddenly an incredible thing happened. The Shadow grew taller. The deer saw it and bolted, running right in the direction of the old cabin we were inside. We ducked down and peered out the bottom of the windows, trying to hide ourselves, but not wanting to miss a second of this. Behind the deer, crashing and making a terrible racket, came the shadow. Suddenly, it burst out of the woods on all fours, and we could finally see. It was something like a sheepdog, only a very dark, black and brown sheepdog, its eyes entirely covered. Once in the clearing behind the cabin, it stood up on its hind legs and roared so loudly that it made my eardrums hurt. Then it fell back to all fours and thundered after the deer once again. As it ran past the cabin diagonally, its footsteps were so heavy that it felt like the old building was going to come down around us. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the building shook as though there were an earthquake happening. It took us a long time to build up the nerve to walk home after that, but when we did so, we did it silently. The next time I went out to visit, I was surprised that my aunt and uncle had sent Ginny away to some summer boarding school. It seemed so out of character for them, and so odd that they hadn't told me beforehand. They said it was fine for me to stay, but without Ginny there, I wasn't sure what to do. I figured I'd go to the cabin and watch out for the shadow, but they stopped me at the door, asking me where I was going. I told them the old cabin, but they got a panicked look in their eyes and told me it had been condemned and I must never go back to it. I didn't really believe them because they were acting so weird, but I didn't disobey them either. I just hung around being bored for a few more days, then called my parents to come pick me up. They begged me to stay since they enjoyed having some alone time each summer, but I went home and got a summer job and never went out to visit my aunt and uncle or Ginny ever again. And that's the story of the Dogman by the old cabin. And now, get ready for an all-new, completely uncensored, slightly bloody, and absolutely terrifying new Dogman story. Oh, wait. YouTube won't allow me to tell you stories like that on this channel. If you want to hear that, you're going to have to go to peterbernard.com and sign up for our paid subscribers club. You can choose any price you can afford for a 1-month subscription, and then every weekend, we tell you a story YouTube would never allow us to tell you on this channel. See you this Sunday for an all-new, very scary, completely uncensored Dogman story.
If you enjoyed this, please click like or consider subscribing. Remember to click the bell icon or you won't get notifications. If you want to listen to Bigfoot's secret uncensored story each Sunday, just go to peterbernard.com and become a paid subscriber. See you tomorrow. Same dog time, same dog channel.